And we are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Our second guest in this hour, we saved the best for last, is Fred Redmond, Secretary-Treasurer of the 63 unions and 15, that's 15 million members of the AFL-CIO. In 2022, he was unanimously elected to the position as the highest ranking African American officer in the history of the labor movement in the United States of America. Check out the website for the AFL-CIO. It's aflcio.org. On Blue Sky, the handle is at AFL-CIO. On Facebook, Instagram, and X, it is also at AFL-CIO. And Secretary Redmond's handle on X is St. Redmond, that's Redmond. Secretary Redmond, good to have you back with us. Always good to speak with you, sir.
Sadly, thank you, Leslie. It's great to be here.
And great to have you with us. Sadly, it is not a great time in our nation when we look at voting rights, when we look at democracy and the threat to our democracy, and we look at what these decisions, these rulings, this redistricting and gerrymandering are doing specifically to working people. So this is dangerous. This is dangerous not just for the state of Louisiana. We're seeing other states, Alabama, Mississippi, et cetera, moving on. Now, the AFL-CIO called this Supreme Court ruling, quote, an outright attack on the fundamental freedoms of working people. That is strong language, but it is accurate. So why do you see this decision as such a major turning point? Why is this an outright attack on the fundamental freedoms of working people?
Well, Leslie, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it was passed to correct centuries of discrimination against Black Americans that really prohibited them from participating in our democracy. And it has been hailed as the crown jewel of civil rights activism and arose from bloody resistance, especially in the South. So this was a blow to all Americans who believe in liberty and freedom and believe in democracy. Then when you look at the aftermath of what's going on, last night, state of Alabama, they rushed to pass new maps. And Tennessee, they have gerrymandered to eliminate their only Black district. And the Louisiana elections have been pushed back to draw new maps in order to push Black representation out of the political system. So when we think about how the Voting Rights Act was made up of several sections, including measures to ensure that every American can access the ballot box and that our votes would be counted, to stop state legislators from passing discriminatory laws, and to guarantee fair congressional representation of voters of color. And since the moment that the Voting Rights Act was passed, there has been a single-minded effort and strategy to destroy it. And, we could go back to 2013 in a case called Shelby County versus Holder. It was then that the Supreme Court stopped states from going through a process called pre-clearance, where states had to get permission. States with a history of discrimination and violating people's voting rights had to get permission from the courts, had to petition the courts in order to change voting rights laws, and gave the court oversight to make sure that those law changes that they want to make does not go back to disenfranchising voters. They canceled that in 2013. And that decision itself rolled back decades of progress of holding states accountable for discrimination and voting laws. So what happened on April the 29th of this year, the Supreme Court just issued a devastating blow to the Voting Rights Act and an outright attack on the fundamental freedoms of working people. This decision strips Black and Latino voters in Louisiana and throughout the South of having a fair say in their elected representatives. So this is a clear setback, but what this has done is really, really mobilize people throughout this country to say, that's a bridge too far. And we're in the process of working with different organizations throughout the country, working with the religious community, and working with people of goodwill to make sure that we don't take this land down.
I'm glad to hear that. A lot of people may hear Voting Rights Act case. They think it affects only one state. As you pointed out, and as we've seen, the consequences could spread nationwide. It's already starting. You
Right.
mentioned Tennessee, you mentioned Alabama. What worries you and as Secretary Treasurer for the AFL-CIO, for millions of workers, what worries you most about the precedent this ruling sets?
Well, what it's saying is that it will become legal for states to arbitrarily make sure that Black, Latino representatives do not have an opportunity to participate as a representative in the U.S. government. And we got folks like in Tennessee with Steve Cohen, who was a white Jewish man who fought his life in the civil rights struggle, is being carved out of the map. So what this is saying is that, our representatives, already elected representatives, will be responsible for picking which districts have representation and which districts don't. See, when you gerrymander congressional districts, which the courts have historically said could only be done once every 4 years, I believe it is, during an election or right before an election. But now, when you got in the middle of the elections, or right before an election in this case, you have the state have a right to redraw the maps. Then what it's saying is some people count when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to representation, and some people don't. And that's
Well, with
just,
Louisiana, they're throwing votes out that have already been cast. I mean, it's horrific.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Um,
So I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 you go ahead.
No, I was just getting ready to say that accelerating the concept of gerrymandering, um, it happens across the country, with many states rushing to redraw their districts, and now before the 2026 election, midterm election. And in the days since the decision, we've seen in Louisiana, the Secretary of State already announced they will delay their House primaries, giving state lawmakers time to redraw their congressional maps. So this is unheard of. When they're going to stop the election to give the legislature the time to draw the map to their liking.
Mhm.
And then when we watched and saw, you know, what happened with Abigail Spanberger, the new governor,
Mhm.
when we saw what happened with her, and she did not fight hard enough in a lot of people's attention, when in the state of Virginia, the courts overruled the will of the people who freedomly elected for new maps, and the court just overruled that.
It's
So,
it's so strange too, Secretary Redmond. It's so strange. In California, here where I am,
mhm,
we had a choice as people to say yes or no to the redistricting, and we chose yes. It went to court, and the court lost, and we have proceeded with that.
right,
In the state of Virginia, the people voted, and they voted for that, and then the court said no, your vote
right,
doesn't count. They're not violating their constitution, which the governor should, has some power to tweak, if you will. And I hope she does more, within her power to make, these changes. But in states like Louisiana, the people aren't involved in this decision at all. In Florida, no, the people in Tennessee, the people are not involved in these decisions. And then the court says to Virginia, even though you voted for it, that's
yeah,
wrong. But in Louisiana, you're throwing out votes. That's okay. And then you have the Supreme Court justice saying, I don't want you to perceive the court as being political when they're clearly making decisions in a political sense. Not you can't have it You can't say that you're following the Constitution when you're making a ruling based on the same thing in two different states differently.
Right.
Right? Well, the AFL-CIO statement says voting rights are worker rights. So, can you help connect the dots for those listeners? Why are voting protections so deeply tied to wages, unions, workplace safety, and economic fairness?
Because we have a right every election. We have a right to elect representatives who is coming down to two choices. You support billionaires and corporations, or you support working families, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's the way that it's turning out to be. Elections are important to working people because that's one day during the year when you have an election where everybody is the same. Everybody gets to vote for the representative that's going to look out for their best interests and support the values, okay, that they
Hold that
hold near
thought.
and
Hold
dear.
that thought. Hold
Yeah,
that thought, Secretary Redmond. We got to take a quick break. I hate taking a break, but we'll be right back. I want you to finish
sure.
that. I have more questions for you, and I
Okay.
love what you said there. Everybody's equal on election day. We'll be back.
Mhm.
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. He is Secretary-Treasurer Fred Redmond. He is the Secretary-Treasurer of the 63 unions and 15 million members of the AFL-CIO. Please check out their website, aflcio.org. Their handle on Blue Sky, on Facebook, Instagram, and X is also at AFL-CIO, and Secretary Redmond's handle is at ST Redmond, Redmond. Secretary Redmond, sorry for cutting you off there.
Oh, it's okay.
You were talking about how connecting the dots, how voting rights are workers' rights, and why voting protections are deeply tied to wages, unions, workplace safety, and economic fairness.
Well, workers are connected to every aspect of federal policy and state and local policy. For example, without a strong OSHA Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act, we don't get protections on the job when it comes to safety and health. Without a strong Social Security program, we do not get strong Social Security and retirement life benefits that we pay into. So, elections affect every aspect of working people's lives. And working people really understand that the political system shape every aspect of their life. Like they say, from the cradle to the grave,
Mm.
everything that we do involves legislation, involves politics. We can't escape it. We don't necessarily like it all the time. Okay. We got some people who don't want to get involved, but more and more people are understanding the impact that elections have on their lives and their family lives every day. And as working people, we encourage working people to participate in the franchise itself because it's the one time that we have a chance to make sure that our voices are heard. So
Absolutely.
it's
You,
very important. It's very
you've
important.
spoken, and I think that ties in good to this. You've spoken often about the historic connection between the labor movement and the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Why is that relationship still essential today?
Well, it's still essential today because, and I always quote Dr. King when he spoke at the AFL-CIO convention in 1959 in Belle Harbor, Florida. And Dr. King told the audience, he said, look, the two most fundamental organizations to promote social and economic justice is the civil rights movement and the labor movement. A. Philip Randolph, the great leader of the labor movement of sleeping car porters. A. Philip Randolph formed his own institute before he died to carry on the work that he believed in so strongly, which he referred to as the Black Labor Alliance. He said, when you think about it, issues that affect the Black community are issues that should be on the top of labor's agenda. When you're talking about health care, when you're talking about retirement security, when you're talking about fair and decent wages, and issues that should be on the top of the Black community's agenda should be on the top of labor agenda. It's the same thing. Health care, economic security, retirement security. So there's that relationship. And Dr. King, he made the connection where you can't have social justice without having economic justice. And the famous quote that he made to a reporter, he said, look, reporter was asked about, integrating lunch counters and Dr. King said that's a part of the puzzle, okay? But it don't make sense to integrate a lunch counter when you don't have money to buy a hamburger. So you can't have social justice without having economic justice. The two go hand in hand. And that's why the labor movement, the civil rights movement have been connected at the hip over the years because, the labor movement is the best movement to build a middle class. I'm part of the Black middle class. My parents migrated from the South to the North, where they were sharecroppers. They farmed other people's land. And they came from the South to the North to seek a better life and to seek an opportunity, okay, at that middle class lifestyle. Well, no, but they wasn't asking for much. They want to work hard, save their money, eventually buy a home, purchase an automobile, the simple things that we take for simple now were things that people had to fight hard to do. And you could not do it without a civil rights movement to fight for opportunities for disenfranchised people and for a labor movement that fought for economic opportunity for workers to provide a decent living for their families. So the two movements, okay, have historically been connected together. And throughout this fight, over voting rights, then the labor movement and the civil rights movement has committed to lead the charge to make sure that this franchise of voting do not escape us and do not disappear from people who really need the political system the most.
Hmm. Well, you and the AFL-CIO have warned that this ruling could, and you
Mm-hmm.
touched upon it earlier, could further concentrate powers in the hands of corporations, billionaires, political insiders. So for everyday working people, what does that actually look like in real life?
Well, for everyday working people, we could see a situation where, working people will begin to lose some of the protections that folks have fought for over the years.
Right.
I mean, this president have already made it illegal in some cases for government contractors to participate in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, this administration has done so much since day one, that is really, really is going to have an adverse effect on working people for years to come. I mean, around the first day of this administration, this president rescinded Executive Order 11246, which has been in place since President Lyndon Johnson signed it in 1965, mandating that federal contractors and subcontractors prohibit discrimination. But these attacks continue to go on throughout this administration. Federal equal employment protections were revoked on day one with EEOC Executive Order 11246 eliminated, threatening decades of progress for Black federal workers. We've seen the largest, um, we've seen the largest anti-job program against Black women with the elimination of government contractors. These were people who worked in clerical positions all throughout the federal government. The largest group of federal employees whose jobs were eliminated happened to be Black women who went to work after World War II, who participated in that migration from the South to the North, and went to work for the federal government, performing secretarial jobs and then later on advanced to work IT jobs and other positions. These were the biggest victims of Doge were Black women. So, we have to look at this for what it is. I mean, you know, um, even got a Department of Justice Civil Rights Division pivoting towards reverse discrimination. Claims white men are being weakened in the employment enforcement. And also the government participating in litigation to that effect. So, and then the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, has been paralyzed for 1 year, could not get a quorum. And now they face 400 a day backlogs, okay, on unfair labor practices due to staff exodus, with people who came into these professions, came in with good intentions, that want to be public servants. There's been an exodus. There's been an exodus because people are not being allowed to work at their full potential because of the policies of this administration that's contrary to everything that we have fought for when it comes to civil and human rights over the years. So
you have just pointed out in a very, in a great manner that how the Black community, also Latino, Native American communities,
right.
Their political voices are weakened when you have these executive orders, but the rulings like this weaken them even more so. Why is it these communities are often hit first and hardest by decisions like this?
Well, this is, I strongly believe that, the whole issue of white supremacy is becoming more and more relevant as the economy shifts, okay? Then it's like, it used to be going back during the civil rights struggle of the 60s. It was one of those sort of things where, people was trying to find out, I'm white, I'm in America, but I'm not being able to fulfill my full potential. And people say, well, it's their fault. Ain't nothing wrong with you. It's their fault. These people on welfare, getting these welfare babies, getting free housing and all that kind of stuff. They're taking advantages away from you. Okay? And today, it's the immigrants.
Yep, and they continue to do it. Secretary Redmond, we are out of time, but I want to talk to you more about this and so many things. Okay. It just flies by when I have you on, as always. Secretary Fred Redmond, Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, 63 unions, 15 million members. Check out their website. Go to aflcio.org. On Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and X. Follow them at AFL-CIO. And on X, follow Secretary Redmond, STREDMOND. Secretary Redmond, thank you for taking the time. And I hope
thank you, Leslie. Thanks for having me.